I'm glad you've joined us today for this weekly devotional here at Dora Church of Christ. I began looking at a short passage this morning, and in my Bible it is headlined as Lights of the World or Lights in the World, and very correctly stated. But I want us to think this morning about who we are, what that means maybe. In Philippians, the second chapter, starting in verse 12, he says, "Therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, so now, and not only as in my presence, but much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling." I want us to think about what he just said. Work out your own salvation in fear and trembling. As a child of God, one who belongs to him. He's talking about obeying. He says himself, as you've always obeyed, now not only in my presence, not only while this idea about Paul was watching them, but even as he left, he continued to obey God's God's will, God's precepts, God's commandments. Not necessarily because they're commandments. Oh yes, I think we should follow those commands out of a fear because we know that God is judge. But he's saying follow these commandments, follow these precepts out of a love for Christ. He said, "For it is God who works in you both to will and to work for his good pleasure." Seeking to do God's will, seeking to do the things he sets before us. But this next short passage becomes very important in the work that we do, because it begins to show, or it begins to help us understand that we are perceived by the world, either as following God or not following God. We're perceived by our what we exhibit in our life. We are perceived by what happens or how I expose myself. He said, "Do all things without grumbling or disputing, that you may be blameless and innocent, children of God without blemish in the midst of a crooked generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world, holding fast to the word of life, so that in the day of Christ I may be proud that you did not run in vain, or that I did not run in vain, or labor in vain, even as I am to be poured out as a drink offering upon the sacrificial offering of your faith. And I am glad and rejoice with you all. Likewise, you should be glad and rejoice with me." But I want us to catch the first part of what he says here. Do all things without grumbling or disputing. Do we belong to the Lord? That's a question I think we must ask ourselves, or just to remind us of who we are. Am I following God? Am I doing the things that are set in front of me without grumbling, without disputing among one another, especially us as brothers? And so often we look at one another, and this covers an aspect that we're going to study on Wednesday night, this idea of envy, looking at one another and envying what one another has. We begin to dispute. We begin to grumble against one another. We begin to grumble within ourselves and say, well, I don't understand why this has to be this way. Why can't I have that? Do I belong to God? I'm his child. Am I his child? Don't we all have salvation through God? Remember, he says, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. I must remember who I am. I must look and see myself. I must begin to understand how I am to exhibit myself as a child of God. Shouldn't the first thing I have within my life, if being a child of God, shouldn't I be joyful? Not happy. I mean joyful. From within inside, knowing that I belong to Christ. Seeking to show Christ's love in my heart. Seeking to show it in my actions. Seeking to show it in my everyday life. Who am I? Am I a child of God? I know there are many more things. This idea of following Christ, seeking to do as he did, seeking to follow him through baptism, seeking to do all of these things, all of these commands, and doing them out of love. But if I'm a child of God, that love should be exhibited in my life. I should be one who is joyous. I should be one who has this idea of victory over the world, victory over malice, victory over grumbling, victory over dispute, victory over hatred, victory over those worldly things. I want us to go about this week thinking about this idea. In a world that is so full of dispute and anger and hate and discomforts, disagreements, disappointments, that I carry this jubilance within my being, and it being what is foremost in front in my life before others, so that they can see that I'm a child of God who walks differently than the world walks. I want us to think about that this week. Who am I? Do I belong to God? Am I exhibiting that kind of being that exhibits God in my life? I hope that you take this week and use it as an encouragement to look different to the world. Thank you for being here with me this morning, and may God bless you.